If you've ever Googled autism and ended up more confused than when you started, I don't think you're alone. The misunderstanding is this: more information equals more clarity, but it doesn't. Today, Dr. Theresa Lyons helps us cut through the myths and overwhelm so we can understand autism in a way that leads to a calmer support and better outcomes. So, Theresa, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me here.
Let's dive straight in. If someone types "what is autism" into Google and gets thoroughly overwhelmed by the information that's out there, how would you explain autism in simple, humane language?
The answer they're going to get is going to be pretty much wrong. So it's going to say it's a nerve developmental disorder, it's lifelong, um, and it's going to pretty much say there's not much you can do. And that is not true. That is really old, old, old information. It takes so long for scientific information to go from discovery to mainstream practice. It takes 20 to 30 years. So I can definitely quote science that can really change what parents think is possible for their child. So the first thing would be autism is not lifelong for everybody. That's a scientific fact. And there are different tests to do to really optimize health. So if you Google what is autism, you're going to get the wrong answer. And you don't want to base decisions for your child on old information.
Okay, so obviously the diagnostical criteria, obviously they sort of state the what used to be the triad of impairments and things like that. Is that still kind of what you class as autistic traits, or how do you now class that then in the way that you communicate about it?
So, autism is a diagnosis, and it's a diagnosis based on observation only. So, typically, the process is you get an assessment by a physical therapist and a speech therapist and an occupational therapist and maybe a psychologist or something along those lines. And then you take all those reports and you go to a pediatric neurologist or a developmental pediatrician, someone with specialized training who can make that autism diagnosis. A general pediatrician is not allowed to make that diagnosis because they don't have the training. And so, what these specialists are looking for is the first area is deficits in social communication. So, that might be maybe a child has speech, but there's not that back and forth. Or maybe there's only speech when it's revolving around a particular topic, like trains or the weather or something along those lines. And it also these specialists will look at eye contact. How good is the eye contact? Is it there? Do they understand social context? So that's one area that observation wise doctors will be looking at. And then another area is the restrictive or repetitive patterns. So this is a lot of people think of stimming. So maybe someone flaps the hands a lot or rocks or really paces a lot. Maybe this is where fidget toys, people might see someone just constantly fidgeting. So that's the other criteria where it's this restrictive, repetitive behaviors. And just keep in mind that all of these criteria that we're talking about has an impact on that person's life. So it's not as if some people can fidget, right? I fidget. I try very hard not to fidget with my hair when when I'm on video and stuff like that, right? So I fidget, but I can stop it. It's not really interfering with my ability to do, my job or my hobby or anything along those lines. So it's important to understand that for an autism diagnosis, there has to be that restrictive and prohibitive factor to it. Um, and typically the diagnosis is made earlier, although lately autism diagnosis has been given, later in life, 20s, 30s, but it's typically earlier. And really what I'm talking about is kids who are diagnosed with autism. So really like under 10.
Yeah. Okay. So you've kind of said there that you've mentioned some of the kind of typical, well, the two main criteria, three main criteria of diagnostical criteria. And you said there and started off with what autism isn't, that there's a lot of kind of myths around it. So what do you feel autism is then?
Right now, autism is misunderstood and
Hmm.
it's not well classified scientifically and
Yeah.
biologically. It just you have this spectrum, right, which is a large spectrum. So someone with autism could they're called low support needs, or this used to be called a high functioning autistic,
Yes.
right? This is somebody who can dress themselves and make breakfast and walk across the streets, right, and maybe be in a mainstream class but really struggle with different social aspects. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum someone who is more profound, and they might not be able to dress themselves. This might be someone who's headbanging. They might need 24/7 support just because of their needs are so high, even for basic daily living needs. And so what happens is science has been looking for one explanation for all of this. And it's not really possible. So when you look at what elevates a risk for an autism diagnosis, that is really what starts to give parents clues as to what might be really important for their child's health. So health gets really negated a lot when thinking about autism, right? So if you go to a conventional pediatrician and you say, "My child, they're constipated," or "My child, they're not potty training and they're 7 years old," that pediatrician's going to be like, "Oh my goodness, whoa, let's figure this out," right? But if you say, "My child with autism is constipated," a pediatrician is gonna say, that's just autism. Oh, they're not potty trained and they're 7? Yeah, well, kids with autism, that's one of the problems." But that's not fair, and it's not true. And if there are difficulties with any of those, you really wanna look at what is the root cause. So health really just gets dismissed in people with autism.
So the perspective that's currently standing, as far as your scientific understanding, then, is obviously this label that's given based on purely behavioural characteristics, because there is no blood test, there is no kind of brain scan to diagnose what autism is. It's just a set of arbitrary criteria that human beings have created around certain traits, certain behaviours, as you mentioned. But actually, you're saying that there's other factors going on, that there's something more, or this is something that can be changed over a period of time. So
Correct. Yeah,
yeah.
there's a
Okay.
lot involved in health that just gets ignored.
Okay. So things I know, there's some in the past. There's been stuff specifically around diet, for instance. Is that kind of now coming back stronger with better evidence for that? Then is that one area?
Diet definitely is an area that impacts health for sure.
Hmm.
It is very important for kids with autism, but the actual diet itself can vary. So there's 8 different diets that can improve different autism symptoms, and that's
Okay.
the thing, there's so many different symptoms. To pick a diet that will have a meaningful impact, you have to really align the symptoms with what the diet is. So it's really important for parents to they might hear something and then they have to take that next step and say, "All right, is my child having issues with that? Or is that one of their
Mm.
struggles?" And if not, then it's not something to try, even if it worked for other people. And that
Mm.
becomes the difficulty with diet. So diet really makes a big difference. Would you like an example?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
Sure. Okay. So we can do, let's say, dairy. So some kids need to go dairy free, other kids not. S- Dairy on the whole usually is very inflammatory. And there's research studies. There are even research studies that compare what happens to inflammation markers in the body when a child with autism drinks cow's milk versus camel milk. So I know that sounds kind of
Yeah. I hadn't heard of
interesting.
camel milk.
Yes.
I know the camels produce milk, but I haven't heard of humans drinking it very often. So yeah.
Yep. So camel milk it's sold as more of a health alternative. So
Mm.
and there's research that really looked at the inflammatory markers in kids with autism. They did blood tests after consumption, and they saw that inflammation was an issue when the child drinks cow's milk. Now, extrapolate that a little bit further into, let's say, speech. So sometimes a child with autism has difficulties with speech, and about 70% of kids with autism have antibodies in their brain that prevent folate from being utilized the normal way in the brain. So you could think of there's different little transporters, right? The brain is very secure place. It's very sensitive, so our body protects it, the blood-brain barrier, and there are different transporters. And for some kids with autism, 70% or so, there are antibodies that block these transporters. So then folate is in the blood, right? So if you do a blood test, the levels will be fine. But these antibodies block the folate, and a lot of times speech becomes an issue. So
Right.
then, what you can do a blood test for that, and then you can take a different form of folate that uses a different transporter, right? So you have like the front door, and that block is blocked by these antibodies. So you can do a side door, and a lot of times kids' speech just explode. And so when kids have something like cerebral folate deficiency and you do this blood test, it's important to go dairy free because dairy has been known to be one of the triggers to influence the production of those antibodies. So this is how
Mm.
diet is very specific, right? For 70% of kids, it's gonna make a big difference, but that's not everybody. And this is the trick with autism is that you can't just take one thing and apply it to everybody. It just doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so obviously you mentioned diet there. Is there other kind of health factors or other influencing factors? So it seems like you're sort of telling me that autism is obviously a genuine diagnosis, but it's just kind of misunderstood as far as this diagnosis is concerned. That actually it's not, when you're saying it isn't lifelong, it's because if we can make appropriate adjustments to a person's health, environment, circumstances, then the symptoms maybe of autism will be affected. Have I got that kind of right?
Yeah, as an overview, yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so what are the other kind of influencing factors that you think people should be more aware of?
Well, definitely environment is huge. So there's studies on the elevation of autism diagnosis based upon air pollution exposure. So in the third trimester, if a woman is exposed to a certain amount of air pollution, then the baby has a 30% increased risk in developing autism. And if the child is exposed to that same amount of air pollution between the years of 0 and 2, then their risk actually increases by 60%. So there are all these different risk factors that impact health. And so when an autism diagnosis is based on observation, you're basically waiting until the problem is so big, right? That you can see it. So that
Yeah.
is the problem with an autism diagnosis. It's based on observation. When you get the diagnosis, you don't get any direction as to, okay, how do I improve this, right? We see many of our kids who they want to go out and play sports. They want to go and learn. They want to hear books read to them and stuff like that, but their
Mhm.
body just doesn't allow them. So many parents say, "Oh, on our good days, like I could see he really loves learning and he loves his family, he loves being involved." But then there are so many of these bad days, which is really what autism is about. You just don't understand it and
Mhm.
it's frustrating and it's not a true representation of your child.
Right. Okay. So, as far as obviously we mentioned about people Googling and stuff like that, so what would you say are the kind of the top myths about autism that you wish people would, that you wish would disappear? And obviously one of them is that there's nothing you can do about it.
Correct.
Um,
That's number one.
That's
That's
number
number one.
one. So I'll let you have that one. So, is there any others that you're kind of feeling are actually because the beliefs and myths that actually are actively harming families and autistic people?
Well, I think once parents understand the stats. So when my daughter was diagnosed over 13 years ago, um, I found research that showed 10% of kids with an autism diagnosis lost their diagnosis, meaning their health was optimal and there were no speech issues and right no repetitive nothing restricting them from participating in life the way they want. So that was called an optimal outcome. And
Mm,
that's really important information for parents to know. Once I found that and I reached out to the researchers and really understood what it was that they were talking about, that completely changed how I saw my daughter, the decisions I made for her, just even my dreams for her for what her life could be, right? When you get an autism diagnosis and you're told things usually get worse, they don't get better.
Mhm.
How can you have a dream for your child? You really can't, because you keep experiencing like, okay, this is just going to keep getting worse and it's just going to keep getting worse. And that's not true whatsoever. And that's not what the science says. So 2 years ago, another study was done, um, analyzing, okay, when kids lose their diagnosis, and the percentage was 37% of kids diagnosed with autism lose their diagnosis, and that was done by Boston's Children's Hospital, which is a very reputable hospital here in the States. It's really important for parents to understand that autism does not have to be lifelong for everybody, and
Mhm.
that there's a lot that can be done health-wise that then just really allows the child to open up and be who they are.
Yeah. Is it fair to say so? Because obviously the nature of the neurodiverse community is one that can be quite emotive in the way they feel about kind of elements of. And I'm sure, have you encountered that at all? As far as this kind of uh, there's a narrative that definitely is in the UK that we should be accepting neurodivergence or autism exactly as it is. That it's about the environment being wrong for them, not anything that's kind of wrong with them, if that makes sense. And I don't want to kind of label and say there's something wrong with them, but it's a case of that's the perception. So there's almost this like you should accept as completely as they are. Have you come across that in America as well? Is that something that parents want to say, well, I just want to accept my child as how they are, but actually that could mean they're missing out on certain elements of being able to enjoy life in a particular way?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not telling anyone what they should do.
Yeah, 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 of course.
I'm
Yeah.
just explaining the science, because many times
Mm,
parents don't even know they have options,
mm,
right? And this is not really talking about someone's identity, right? So the
yeah,
criteria that you and I discussed about in the beginning, right? You have a deficit in social communication. That's
mhm,
not something that most people kind of wrap up into an identity.
yeah,
And I definitely challenge the notion that an autism diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, is what makes the person unique and special, right? So I think sometimes labels are something that we might latch onto, but we might not fully understand the label. So that's why I'm definitely glad you asked, okay, what's the criteria for an autism diagnosis, right? Because this is a diagnosis. What we're talking about is not an identity. So I'm not talking about people who identify as autism. That's something completely different than someone who has a medical diagnosis of autism. And so the the notion that if you get rid of the autism, you get rid of all those wonderful qualities of a person, that's just something I don't see. I haven't seen with the parents that I've worked with. Their kids get to be more and more of who they are, and you see their
mhm,
personalities start to shine, and determination or humor. I mean, there are some really amazing kids who are funny, but because of that issue with speech, they don't get to express their
mm,
humor. However,
yeah.
once you address different health issues, their their humor just comes out and it's amazing, right? So it's you want to be careful as to um, the characteristics your child has. You don't want to say they're due to a medical diagnosis. They're great. They're great kids, and you're not trying to change the essence of who they are. What you're trying to do is optimize the health so their true essence can come out even more.
So do you think there's some elements that maybe the sensory processing side of things, for instance, is something that definitely, for many individuals on the autistic spectrum, they find that one of the hardest things to overcome. The social differences maybe are navigatable, and as you say, like as learning speech or learning ways of communicating, but the sensory processing is something that they can find difficult. Do you think a lot of the sensory processing elements then are linked to other health factors and can be improved and overcome over a period of time?
Definitely, most definitely. So sensory processing. I mean, think about it. If I went to the doctor and said, "Oh, I'm so sensitive to the light, maybe the light is starting to cause migraines," right? We would start looking at a whole variety of things. However, give me an autism diagnosis and I say, "Oh, the light, oh, you just have that's just the way it is." It's so unfair. It's so unfair that that autism diagnosis then somehow makes a life of pain and discomfort just have to be the way it is, and it's not. You can start to look at, okay, are there any gut infections? Are there any issues digesting certain foods, right? You have a buildup sometimes of certain chemicals in the body. You might have mold exposure, right? Which then you have a lot of toxins and you have the immune system, right? So when someone has sensory processing, you start to think about their nervous system. And then their nervous system is intertwined with their immune system, right? So when the body is just overwhelmed with something, then it gets all overwhelmed. And so
Mm.
sensory processing is something for parents really to understand and ask, why is my child sensitive to light? What about their health is causing that, and then really resolve that.
Mm, okay. And so this is something that you do when you're working with parents, if they're coming to you with challenges with a child, or do you find that people come to you straight away as soon as the autism diagnosis occurs? Is that when they start reaching out, or when do you
I get
find that
both.
you?
I get
Yeah,
both. So I even get parents before their child has a autism diagnosis, right? Because they're
right.
seeing the observations and maybe they're
Hmm.
on a wait list and they might be like, well, what am I gonna wait for? All that's gonna
Yeah,
happen is someone's gonna tell me they have autism and then, I still have
the
to figure out
end.
what to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely a case of the in the UK as well. I mean, the average to get an autism diagnosis is about 3 years over here at the moment.
Yeah.
And then, but once you get it, that's a case of right. That's it. You got it. Good luck. Off you
Yeah,
go.
exactly. Okay. End the
Yeah, and
story.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. Very, very true. Now, one things that you when we were putting some stuff together for you, you spoke about is the biology behind behavior. Then, so what does that mean in real life? Whether for a teacher or a parent on a hard day,
So behavior.
biology behind behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. So many times when kids are having difficulty with speech and communicating, behavior is how they communicate. Not always, right? So sometimes if the lights are too bright, they might have difficulty with their behavior, but they're just trying to communicate like, "Wow, I'm just overwhelmed. The lights are too bright. It's just too much for my body." So it's really important for behaviors to be understood and not just, criticized or tried to stop. It's so important, especially in school, to understand, why is my child doing that? So there's a practice called ABC, which is antecedent, behavior, consequence. And that's really the gold standard when you're trying to understand behavior. And you can see, okay, the behavior easy, all right, my child I don't know, had some type of meltdown, right? And then, okay, what was the antecedent? What happened before? Okay, maybe it was because the next class was biology and it's really loud in biology, right? So the antecedent is, okay, math class ended and we're about to go to biology class, and then the behavior is the meltdown, and then the consequence is, okay, we didn't go to biology, right? So you can start to see, and if your child can communicate in some way, then you can start to say, right, if this happens, like 3 times a week or something like that, then you can start to either ask your child or ask the people in biology, like, what is it about this class that my child might be wanting to avoid? And that's really how you can start to understand when someone has difficulty with speech. You have to take the data though. You can't just do it once and make a decision based upon that, because it might have been sometimes when you take the data, it might be, oh, you know what? Whenever he eats pizza, 2 hours later, we have a meltdown. Right, so then that behavior, it's not he's using that behavior to necessarily get anything or get out of anything or communicate anything. It's just, oh, whenever he eats pizza, right? Whether maybe it's the dairy or maybe it's the gluten or something along those lines. It could be the tomatoes. That causes a health problem. So that's why it's so important to take this kind of data so that you can see patterns and really look at, okay, what is this behavior saying? So it could be the biology of the pizza, right? Or it could be the behavior of the biology class that there might be something that's just too overwhelming.
Mm. Do you also find one of the things I find with that is people sometimes forget to look at the times that the behavior doesn't occur as well. So when they're doing something like an ABC analysis, for instance, and they're looking at the patterns of behavior, that sometimes they forget. And what about the day that it didn't occur? What about the day that that behavior didn't happen? They don't even notice those, and it's a case because they're too busy focusing on the times it did, and they miss
Right.
the kind of the glimmer, the kind of little bit of, oh, okay, well that was different, and that didn't then trigger a behavior, and that's where we need to focus and see what's working, not just what isn't
Yeah.
working.
Definitely, and sometimes it's, the child had a really good night's sleep then.
Yeah.
So there are so many factors, and again, this is what makes autism so complex. There's not just a straightforward answer.
Yeah. So there is this thing as so whether parents or teachers are often sort of referring to, is it their autism or is it just behavior? What's probably a better question to ask that leads to understanding, maybe rather than blaming a little bit sometimes or labeling.
Oh, kids with autism get blamed all the time for behavior. Just
Mm,
it's completely unfair. Um, so I mean, that question is getting at emotional regulation and emotional
mm,
dysregulation, right? And so there's actual models of emotional regulation and how do people have studied how do people normally regulate, and there's something called situation selection, right? And this is when people choose to avoid a situation that probably is going to cause some kind of emotions or something along those lines. So sometimes kids with autism, they will do a behavior to avoid another situation. Like in that example, I was talking about biology class, right? So they're having a behavior to avoid something that would be even worse. They just don't have the language or the communication to express that. So many times, like if that were a teenager and they were saying, okay, biology class is too triggering for me, right? The school counselor would be like, all right, let's figure something out, right? But when you don't have that ability to communicate and all you have is behaviors, let me have a meltdown, let me do something so I don't have to go and do X, that gets labeled as behavior in a negative way. And
mm,
it's just really unfortunate because kids with autism are smart, right?
mm,
They're being wise as to, okay, that next situation is not good for me. So let me be situation selective. And due to the lack of communication, a lot of times is just seen negatively. So that's really when behavior gets labeled in a negative way, when
mm.
it's just someone with autism trying to communicate in the best way they know how.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behavior that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behavior can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, Achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. One of the perceptions that there's been about autism as well is obviously when we looked at, you mentioned earlier the terms like kind of high functioning, low functioning and stuff like that. It's often associated with communication, their ability to communicate. So when it was the kind of the old autism and Asperger's kind of diagnosis, it was usually then Asperger's is a higher level of communication skills. And therefore it was assumed that then individuals who are non-verbal or non-speaking probably were lower intelligence or had like kind of lower cognitive capacity.
Right.
So as far as the understanding is then, so some children can look cognitively impaired or come across as cognitively impaired, but you're saying actually they're potentially a bit more trapped rather than cognitively impaired.
Yes. So for many years, profoundly autistic people, those who are not speaking, maybe they're just moaning and flapping their hands or uh, stimming, rocking back and forth. And visually, you might think, there's no way that person can pay attention. There's no way that person can't speak. So I
Mm,
really don't know what they know. And so a lot of times when given some type of IQ test, right, if you can't speak and you don't have motor control to take a pencil and, circle or fill in the bubbles, then you get a diagnosis of intellectual disability.
mm,
But when those people are given a way to actually communicate, then this is what's been in the research lately is that those IQ tests are completely wrong, and kids with autism, many of them don't have that intellectual disability that they thought they had. It was just a lack of ability to communicate. So there's something called spelling to communicate, and there's a few different varieties of it. And it's basically you use gross motor skills instead of fine motor skills. So when speech is hard, right? What do we do next? We're like, okay, let's type on the keyboard or something like that, right? Fine motor skills, this is actually quite hard. Um, so especially for someone who has something like dyspraxia, which is motor planning difficulties. So with the letter boards, kids are using gross motor skills. So they're just using the motion in their shoulder to spell things out. And you have kids who are profoundly intelligent, not profoundly intellectually disabled.
mm.
I've interviewed several on my YouTube channel, and there was one adult. He was in his 20s. It turns out he was actually bilingual, although he couldn't speak, right? But he could spell out in both English and Italian because both those languages were spoken at home.
Right. Okay. So the receptive communication was there. He'd been processing it, but he just didn't have a way to practice it with expressive
Correct,
communication,
and
essentially.
express it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so so many times profoundly autistic people are considered intellectually disabled when they're
Mm,
not. It's just they
mm.
don't have a way to communicate.
There was a book that opened that my eyes up to that. It was called a book called, and I'm afraid I can never remember the author's name. I think he's a child, a Japanese child, who wrote
Yes, The Reason
who
I
wrote.
Jump.
Yes, oh, absolutely. And that was just, it was such an amazing book for somebody who is non-speaking that then obviously learned to use an iPad. I believe he wrote all his books with. I think he's written a few books now, hasn't he?
Y
And it was such an amazing insight into
Yes.
how he perceived the world and how he kind of understood it. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
and a very easy read. It's a
Very,
it's a
yeah, yeah.
it's a small book, which is always
Yes, it was
always
like pick it up,
grateful.
read a chapter, put it down. It was so insightful though, and it really did help me
Yeah,
to kind
and
of
that's
understand more about
exactly.
the condition.
Yeah, research studies historically, so I mean this is where autism gets complex. Historically, it has been said that um the person who's holding the letterboard is the one with the intelligence, and the person with autism, they don't have intelligence, right? So there's this whole controversy even when that book was published. Did he really write it, or was it, his parents or whoever was holding the letterboard? And so recently, it was maybe 4 years ago, the first study using eye tracking devices, which is, brilliant. Yeah, let's just use data to answer that question, right? So they were able to see that the eye would look right at the letter, and they didn't 100% always put the finger to the letter, but 100% they always looked at the letter. So the eye muscles were more reliable than the finger, which is what we know when there's dyspraxia. It's a motor planning issue, right? You know what you want to say, you know what you want to spell, you have that in your mind, you look at it, but then your body sometimes goes awry. So it's really great to see scientists actually do the work and use technology to say, no, this person with profound autism might look like they have an intellectual disability, but they don't, because they can look at the letters and this is what they're spelling and this is what they're saying. And it's them, it's not, the person holding the letterboard.
Mm. I do remember what I often use it when I'm teaching around the subject related to eye mapping. I know we're getting so much better at it now, and our technology is improving all the time. But I did, and this is maybe where you'll know significantly better than I do. But there were some studies that showed that there may be a reliable way of recognizing autism earlier, and that may be using eye tracking as far as where a baby typically tends to look at a mother's eyes and engage in that communication, whereas an autistic child doesn't tend to engage. They'll look sort of everywhere else. And I know there's some other studies that I've seen around. I remember I show a video which shows kind of eye contact or eye tracking of somebody with autism watching a scene. And whereas most of us, our eyes are drawn towards the gesture, the touch, the smile, the little subtexts that are going on in an interaction between two people, whereas the autism eye tracking was to the light and to the picture and they weren't picking up on those things. Is that growing in evidence? Is that an old myth? Where is that sitting as far as understanding is concerned?
I think it's still on the table, especially now with AI, getting more and more of those videos. There are different tests that are coming out. We talked about in the beginning about there are different risks and risk factors for kids to develop autism later in life. So there's two new tests that just came out in the past like 3 months, right? And so one is called the MARA. It's maternal autoantibody related autism. So it's a blood test, and the test is done on the mother. So there's some research that shows about 20% of kids with autism have increased severe autism because of antibodies that the mother had in her body while she was pregnant. So then it inhibited certain developmental processes in the baby. So that is a blood test to do. And mothers are doing it either before pregnancy, you can't do it while pregnant. Um, you can do it after, even just a few days after the child's been born, so that then you can get a better quantification of the risk. So this
Mm.
makes a difference, like if you're on a wait list, or if you're thinking, should I start some therapies? Should I make sure vitamin D is, at the optimal levels, right? This gives the guidance as to what might be an issue later on in this child's life. There's also another test. It's called ASD Insight. This is a skin biopsy. Um, Obviously not the most favored test for a parent to have done on their child, but
Mm.
it's a small skin biopsy. And what they do is they're looking at different cellular functioning of mitochondria and of different like calcium channel gates, so passing messages um, in the body, right? Like
Mm.
that's how the body uses um, neurotransmitters to transmit, move the finger and stuff like that. So that's another test based on biology that is being used, and it can be done, from birth onwards up. So these are newer tests. So there's a lot more people trying to understand the biology, and I think it's great that there are these different tests because it acknowledges that, hey, we're not trying to describe all of autism, right? And trying to more put things into subtypes, that's really beneficial.
That's one of the things that's kind of changed, isn't it? So obviously it was originally you had these different diagnoses, whether it be autism, then Asperger's, and then PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorders not otherwise specified. I think there was another one in there as well. I can never remember what that one was. Um, but then they kind of just block them together to call them autism spectrum condition or disorder, and then conditions, as some people prefer to kind of refer to them as. So are you saying that we're actually trying to move back to a little bit of actually segregating it up to a certain degree, but in a more scientific way rather than just behavioral characteristics that are kind of labeling this individual?
Yeah, that seems to be the way these different tests are evolving to try and really understand the biology and not relate it so much to what you see in the behavior, because that really varies on the person, right? So it's important to understand the biology. I don't know. I mean, eventually, maybe there will be formal subtypes and subclasses. I think it will take probably at least 5 years before we're
Yeah.
there, right? This is the whole thing where it takes time, and so a parent has to decide, how long do I wanna wait for information, right? So, like, when you the ASD Insight test that I just talked about, it was approved in January 2026, right? So,
Oh wow.
you know,
Yeah. Very
very
new.
recently, right? And so some parents will be like, "All right, I want to get as much information as possible. I'm comfortable with understanding that this has been studied enough to be allowable, but not studied enough that this is the gold standard care that is given to someone with autism." So a parent has to decide for themselves, where do I feel comfortable in navigating the healthcare system? If you want to wait, it's totally fine. Just know that you might be waiting 5 years, 10 years, and even longer. So it just is a measure of the risk, right? So doing a skin biopsy, the risk is kind of small. The cost is about $1,000, right? So, you're definitely going to spend money on that. But do you not have good information about your child? Or do you have a concern? Maybe an older child of yours has autism and you want to really get ahead of things. This is how parents have to make decisions. And it's unique because in so many other areas of healthcare, you don't have to make those decisions. The doctor's just like, all right, you've got these four options. Let's do this test. If this test comes back this number, we do this, right? Like, it's all black and white.
Yeah.
And in autism, it's not there. And that's what makes it so hard. You have to navigate all this stuff and apply it to your child, but then also say, okay, the risk of what I do, what's the risk reward benefit ratio? And
Mm.
am I comfortable with that?
That kind of leads me on to my next question. You may have already answered it there, but so how do you help families stop chasing kind of every new trend they come across online and start making confident, evidence informed decisions related to their child?
If we work with science. So I'm a scientist. I have my PhD in computational chemistry from Yale. I was a medical strategist in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not someone who's just going to be like, oh, let's come up with an idea and try it and see and hope for the best. Like,
Yeah.
that is not me whatsoever. It's always, all right, let's get an understanding of the symptoms. All right, these are the things that diet might make sense for. Does the parent want to do anything with diet? Yes, no, right? So these are all options for the parent to take. For me, I didn't want to make diet changes for my daughter in the beginning because I was just like, oh, it's too hard. I didn't spend the time to understand the science. I was just having more that, like, mainstream reaction, like, oh, gluten free, come on, like, I didn't even know at the time I was pushing back what the mechanism of action was, right? So it was an irrational response. So it's really, make sure you understand the science. Make sure you're making your decisions based on quality information, and then start where you feel comfortable. So I feel very comfortable with, interacting with doctors and finding really good doctors. So that might be where a parent might want to start. Or they might say, hey, yeah, let's change diet because I know for me, diet makes such a big difference, right? It depends on the parent. So when I work with parents, it's all about, okay, these are the options. let's get granular on what is meaningful for your child. And then what do you think you can be successful in? Like, can you actually do it? Do you want to make that kind of change? And you start where they want to, because then things are much easier when you're doing something you want to do.
Mm. So you mentioned diet there. What would you say are the other sort of key factors that you tend to introduce or explore when you're working with parents?
We have something called the Navigating Autism Matrix.
Mhm.
And in that, we have 7 categories. So we have diet, we have healthcare team, we have supplements, we have mindset for the parent,
Yeah, yeah.
we have education, we have probiotics, and we have celebrating success. So those are the 7 areas that parents really need to focus on, and they want to have really good, up to date information, scientific
Mm.
information. And you just look at it and you say, okay, where do I want to start? All right, let's start there. And you start having success, and then you start asking, okay, what else can we do?
Hmm, okay. So, and what kind of results? I mean, obviously, we're looking two parts here, aren't we? Sort of the parents better being able to cope, understand their child, navigate the world of being a parent, but also then for the individual themselves to have a healthier, happier life, engaging in a way that they feel most comfortable with. So, what are some of the biggest changes you found with some of the families and individuals you supported and worked with?
Oh my goodness. Entirely different lives.
Mm.
Let's see. Okay, so kids, uh, dad and the son, taking the karate lessons and, increasing in the belts and stuff. I have one dad who always emails me next time, the next belt is achieved. And he's like, oh, we could never have done this without, you and understanding the science and doing this and doing that. To, simple things as in the beginning, like a child going to get their hair cut without a problem, a child going to the dentist without a problem, right? So when you start doing things that help communication, that help the nervous system, the immune system relax and unwind, right? You might have buildup of different toxins. Um, all of those things make a difference. You have kids who go from not speaking to speaking 4 languages. I've worked with parents whose kids completely off the spectrum, right? So then the parents are off like, wow, I could focus on me again. Right. So I mean, there's so much that changes. And some of the best is just when the parent is able to stand back and watch their child just engage in life and do what they want without any barriers or limits. I mean, that's exactly what all parents want.
Mm. Do you think that every family, every child, or even every adult, maybe with autism, can be have a better lifestyle than they currently have at the minute? Do you think everybody can be helped on that front?
I think everybody could be helped in some regards. I can't make any guarantees as to what that looks like, right?
Mm.
So it depends also on how much action a parent
Yeah.
or a person themselves is willing or wanting to take. So I'm talking really about health here. So some people they might resolve 1 or 2 things and then say, we're good, we're happy, right? So again, it's not me telling anyone how they should be or what a successful life looks like or a successful parenting journey looks like. I'm here to educate. So if someone is saying, hey, we're not where we want to be. What are the reasons why that could be? That's where a parent, engages with me. It's up to them as to where they want to go.
Yeah, I suppose for some it's just having that they're happy with their child as they are, but there's just some bits that maybe they really struggle with as far as engaging in certain activities, or they're incredibly worried about their diet, for instance. You know, if they've got a very limited or restricted diet, that could be something that you know some parents, because I know of children obviously who one kid will eat nothing but Wotsits, for instance, which
Right.
you don't know when you know what Wotsits are, I
Nope.
suppose. Cheetos, I suppose, is the equivalent. Okay. Um, so he'll only eat Cheetos and kind of that is it.
Right,
And I
but
know that,
that's a health issue, right? So,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that is not so yes, autism has that repetitiveness, that
Mm,
restrictiveness, right? But that in and of itself should not be lifelong, right? So what is the reason that that child is only eating those particular things? Is there a gut infection? Is there inflammation? Is there some type of a sensory experience, right, in which that food just feels good and everything else, right? So zinc is a problem potentially. There's so many health reasons as to why that might be, but only if the parent is interested in changing that, um, does it make sense. You can't really force someone to make that change.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think there's a obviously for some children with there's a condition called ARFID, isn't there, which is that restrictive diet and things like that, and commonly associated with the unpredictability of certain foods. So, I saw a parent talking about it yesterday, where he's talking about his son will only eat one type of pizza. So he loves pepperoni pizza, but he'll only eat one pizza that's comes from a green box from a certain supermarket that's got a certain brand on it. So what's the kind of the strategy for kind of overcoming something along those lines? Is it a kind of a mix of different things? Would you explore it scientifically again, as you said?
So sometimes with that level of control, sometimes there is a element of behavior to that, right? So you have to really look at the situation as a whole. Obviously, first you want to think about health, and you would want to look at gut infections and vitamin D status and nutrients, their B levels. Do they have enough nutrients? What about their zinc? A lot of times when zinc is low, then you can't really taste anything. So that's when you have very strong preferences for certain things. And then it's also okay, what is this behavior saying? Is there that demand on that particular pizza from a particular box from a particular store, right? Is that a behavior that is maybe a reaction to the parent always taking them to different therapies and stuff like that, right? So that could be an expression. So I look at it in the whole. I don't eliminate anything automatically. It's really just understanding the data, and the data is the health, but then also, okay, what's going on? When does this happen? Is this every day? Is there some days where you could eat something from somewhere else? Right. So it's really important to understand the situation as a whole.
Obviously there could be some individuals out there listening who've been through a journey of being autistic, as far as they're concerned, all their lives. And so for adults listening who suspect they might be autistic or are autistic, what's one compassionate thing you'd want them to know about themselves?
If there's something about their health, about their body that is really holding them back from doing different things, whether that's anxiety or OCD or maybe joint pain, anything along problem sleeping, anything along those lines, they've likely been told by doctors that that's just autism or they get dismissed. And so it can be very hurtful to
Mm,
have something not be right with their body, but then being dismissed constantly by different doctors. So I would say that I believe you. I believe that there is something with your body that just is not the way you want it to be. And to keep looking for a doctor who focuses on the root cause. So usually those are functional medicine doctors. Those are doctors that practice in the sense of let me understand what the root issue is, whereas a conventional medicine doctor just gives a short term solution, right? So if someone has
mm,
anxiety, well, maybe let's try this medication, right? And so maybe you try medication, it worked, or it didn't work, or it worked well, but now it's not. You really might want to seek out the help of a functional medicine doctor because they'll look at understanding what's the root cause for that anxiety.
mm. Nice. Great advice. So if you could give every parent or teacher kind of one North Star principle for supporting autistic people well, what would it be?
I would say whenever you think about an autistic child, think of them on their best day because
Mm,
that is truly who they are. And these other bad days, that's not really them. That's their body failing them in many ways. That's frustration from not being able to communicate. That might be not sleeping well. so many other issues. But the true essence of who that person is what you see on their best day.
I love that. I love that. That's beautiful. I think it's one of the I often say to groups when I'm kind of teaching, would any of you like to be judged who you are on your worst day? Um, that grumpy day when somebody holds a door open for us and we don't say thank you because we're just in a bit of a grump. We're mind somewhere else, and then that person then for the rest of our life thinks they're just horrible.
Yep.
And yet
Yeah.
so often we get caught in that cycle, whether it be within care, whether it be as parents, whatever it is, that we see that we focus on the negative because that's the nature of the human brain, the way we work is that, we're
Yeah.
drawn towards that negative from a survival point of view. And then it's really hard to see anything other than that kind of that dark cloud. So I thought that was a beautiful thing to say, and really important message. So, as we're coming to a close, it's been a fascinating conversation. And I think obviously we'll make sure there's some information in our show notes of how people can reach out to you and find out more about what you do and the work that you do. There's definitely a growing understanding around a difference in approach to autism and the stuff you've spoken about from a scientific basis. I think it's really important that it gets out there into the mainstream. But if a parent, carer, or teacher is listening right now, feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed and scared that they'll get it wrong, because I think that's sometimes how they feel, like, what if I try this and it's wrong, or what if I do this and it's wrong? What's the kind of one message you'd want them to hold on to, and maybe one small step they can take, even just this week?
Yeah. So if someone thinks, I'm going to mess this up, don't do it. Don't do it. You don't have confidence in what you're doing. So take a pause, examine your own emotions because you might still be, let's say, upset from the autism diagnosis. You might still have anger over how life has completely changed and you don't want it to be like this. And this is not what you signed up for. And how is this your life now? Right. So if you're in that emotional state, it's it's not the time and the place to make decisions, especially big decisions for your child. So just take a pause and get more grounded, get more towards neutral. And then look at, okay, what is it that we want to do? And when you find the right thing, you'll know it. You'll be like, yep, this is it. This is it. And I would advise using science, right, to guide you for any of these decisions. But the parent needs to be at a grounded, neutral state at best so that they
Mm.
can make good decisions.
Yeah, so it's that they need to be calm, and that's what you mentioned in your 7 steps mindset. I should imagine is a big part
Yep,
of that.
mindset,
As it,
hugely important. Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Hugely
yeah.
important. You want a growth mindset. You want to have an understanding that you don't have to do things perfectly. And also understanding the expectation that yes, we're talking about improving health, but it doesn't change in 10 days. You can't just do one thing and everything is going to change. Like we make one diet change. Okay, we're going to go dairy free. Is my expectation that okay, my child's going to go to mainstream in 14 days? You have to have a reasonable expectation. That's why you want to understand the symptoms and you also want to understand the intervention that you're doing. What does that actually impact and change? So it's really important to have all of that so that expectations are appropriate.
Awesome. Well, as we're towards close, I've got two more questions for you,
Sure.
Theresa, if that's all right. So one is, what is the biggest project that you're working on right now?
The biggest project is the Navigating Autism platform. So having parents from around the world understand the science, have health coaches to help them through mindset and understanding what are my expectations and how are things going and how do I keep going. That's really the largest project and my biggest passion because I know how much of a difference the quality scientific information makes. And I know many parents want that information sooner rather than later. So like for my daughter, if I was waiting for different information, we'd still be waiting, right? And that's not something I want to do. There are many low risk, really beneficial things to do that can change so much. So I'm really working on parents being able to access that affordably and easily.
So how do parents and people find navigating autism platform? Is there
Yeah, you can go to navigatingautism.com, and I spell autism differently. I spell it AWE.
AW?
So,
Yes.
yep.
Awesome. Okay, I will make sure that's in the show notes anyway. And last question, you kind of maybe already hinted at it there, but what's the thing that lights you up about your work the most?
Oh, about my work. I love working with parents when they have a tough day and then they pull themselves out of it and appreciate themselves for all the work that they do. I think that is something that I truly enjoy, and I know it personally, right? So when my daughter got the autism diagnosis, we had mostly bad days, right? Like mostly bad days. And then little by little and steady work and understanding and researching and just taking action, consistently taking action and enjoying the parenting journey all along. So I did have to release that fairy tale that I had, that this is what parenting is going to be, and we're going to be doing this and tea parties and just all this kind of stuff. Um, but it can be so much more beautiful than you ever expected. But if you're so caught up on what you don't have, you end up missing what you do have, which is an amazing child. Yes, they have challenges, and it takes a lot of work to kind of sort through and understand them and resolve them, but it certainly can be done.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Theresa Lyons, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and finding out a little bit about your work and the study you're doing. And it sounds like there's an awful lot of misinformation out there, and the scientific community is slowly permeating through as far as getting this the new updated information out there. So I'm sure there'll be lots of people out there with lots of questions and wildly googling information right now based on some of the studies you've mentioned and information you mentioned. So thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, for anybody listening who's found the information we've gone through useful, interesting, or valuable, please like, comment, and share it. Maybe somebody that you know might benefit from this information. Do reach out in the show notes to Dr. Theresa Lyons and check out her work with the Navigating Autism, spelled AWETISM, and see what they're all about over on the other side in New York. Cheers.